Looks like Ramayana is on again on Indian television, but the difference is that it's on the news channels this time. For a pious Hindu, Ram is very much on their lips, is part of the greetings, it's part of iconography, it's a story, it's a metaphor, it's a god who's worshipped and remembered. So to borrow from there and to fuse it with your election campaign is something that is a very powerful tool to sort of distract people. Why does it take a Shankaracharya to tell people that the temple is half built and there's a problem with the consecration in a half built temple? This should be something that the media should be asking. Seeing how things unfolded exactly at 12 o'clock, it seemed as if all the policemen and all the CRPF troops, particularly in the place where the Babri Masjid was, just disappeared. So they clearly did not want any recording of the pulling down of the mosque to happen. But I think 1992 that way was also a huge start to the build-up of a divide which challenged the whole idea of Indian nationhood. We've had governments with huge margins. Mrs. Gandhi has twice got more seats than the BJP has managed even now. Nehru had more, but you didn't have this kind of blanket suppression. So you cannot sell your print newspapers. There is no revenue model they have. So because the collapse of the economic model, because they're facing the technological challenge of digital, and this is a world thing, so the only way they can make money is through government ads. So that dependency on the government has increased. There is a certain leader who's getting like 10 million people to his public rally. And I'm sitting here alone with a pen. I can't rally even 5. Do I have the authority, or should I even be writing this? Because he's got people on their side. Which is what explains whether it was in the 30s or now, this big show of big sort of, stadium-sized crowds, this whole thing, that you generate that feeling that people were just merely writing, recording, scribes, shall I just turn into a stenographer? Because do I even have the locus to write this? While this man is so popular, or this idea that is really pushing its way.
Joining me is somebody who was on the ground when Babri Masjid was brought down. And over the next few minutes, we'll try and compare and contrast what we're seeing on our television right now and how it was reported back in the day. Seema, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you've been very busy talking to people about your experiences, back in '92. But I want to quickly ask you, have you been watching news at all? Have you been able to kind of digest what's happening?
TV has been a bit of a stretch, so I don't really have the nervous kind of composure to take many hours of it. But as our job involves jumping into the stream periodically, yes, a little bit. Have been watching the build up and the whipping up of frenzy. Yes. So this is something which a kind of a news watcher, a reviewer of news, Shailaja Vajpayee, wrote very evocatively. And she said, it looks like Ramayana is on again on Indian television, but the difference is that it's on the news channels this time. So I think this completely, I would not even call it uncritical coverage. I think it is very clearly driven party coverage that looks like just to kind of promote the politics, the face, and the election campaign of a particular side seems to be on. So I think it's gone beyond the time of saying that why aren't they critical anymore and all. I think all those bridges have been crossed. I think there's a whole fusing of the private sector media into doing what one would have expected or criticized state media to be doing. So not public media, which public broadcaster like the BBC, but what state media is expected to do, kind of chanting, regurgitating, and repeating government propaganda and taking it to higher heights. And that's very evident in the way it's being discussed, the issues that are being discussed, how any kind of other opinion, a completely uncomplicated single point of just infusion of propaganda is at play.
Absolutely, because it's not even the party that they're promoting, because I see hardly any mention of senior leaders, including Advani or even Vajpayee. And it seems completely centered around the current leaders, primarily the Prime Minister Modi. What do you make of the fact that there are hardly any mentions of either the Babri Masjid or the Rath Yatra that led up to this moment?
So I think part of the whole idea is to somehow keep all the complications or things that make it a contestable story, a history, or a narrative that connects with what the story and the truth of India is, and to lift it into a mythical kind of a uh, take leave of your senses. And this the Justice League has arrived and it's got you something, a pie in the sky thing. So I think it is to kind of enable people to forget their reality and to actually serve as an opiate, really, to just keep you going on something which is sad, because Lord Ram is a very signature important kind of a god in the pantheon of the sort of Hindu imagination. And for a pious Hindu, Ram is very much on their lips as part of the greetings. It's part of iconography, it's a story, it's a metaphor, it's a god who's worshipped and remembered. So to borrow from there and to fuse it with your election campaign is something that is a very powerful tool to sort of distract people from all other ills, woes, and troubles, and the record of the past 10 years.
Absolutely. But like I said, there is no reporting that I really see, because even the issues of people from Ayodhya are being ignored. It is left to independent websites like yours and ours, and a bunch of others, including News Laundry, who've come out with reports which talk about the issues that people in Ayodhya are facing, be it their land being taken away or the other kind of issues that they're facing. So do you see any real reporting happening at all?
No, I don't. We just see repetition of certain lines, and I think certain lines have been drawn within which the color pencils have to be wielded. Is very clearly kind of done, and also you've kind of taken away the people from Ayodhya, really. So if you kind of parrot, mouth, and believe in a certain kind of a interpretation of this event, so it's not even as if all interpretations of Lord Ram or the story of Lord Ram, his history, the history of the sentiment or of the place is being foregrounded. So Ayodhya is a multi, is an idea, is a city. It belongs to so many civilizations and imaginations. All of that is squashed and just set aside to push the one story where the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, is going to be a part of a consecration ceremony where he will be the head priest. So it's a very clear kind of fusing of religion, politics, and the state. So all have very kind of disturbing consequences for the India of tomorrow. Forget about the India of today.
And also, this has become yet another tool for the media to go after the opposition, asking them why you're not attending and everything else. What do you make out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite surprised and struck. Certain leaders, etc., who had initially said that they will not be going, even if they didn't say it like that, was interpreted to mean like that by newspapers, by news agencies, and television. So they actually ran headlines which are not in the story. So it was, the whole thing was made to project it as whatever the opposition says is an insult to religious sentiment. Even if the opposition was going out, and actually a lot of people who say critical of the Congress party for relying on the Shankaracharyas for their critique. So a lot of people on the other side said, do not rely on the Shankaracharya critique to be the political party critique. But even though they were doing that, it was made to sound as if they are anti-Ram. And I think the RSS also ran with a letter by Mrs. Gandhi about some visit to the Pope, or some visit related to the Vatican, which she could not make because she was not well. That letter coming out. So things that are completely out of context, but to just tar the opposition as an irreligious, insulting kind of a body. So the whole thing fits in with the campaign that the BJP has been running for several years and decades now. And that seems to be kind of parroted, piloted, and extended by media as we know it.
How do you see the reporting by television, news channels, websites, and print? Is there a difference, or do you see all of them being competitive almost with each other in their communal reporting?
So that's like a difficult question, because I don't know how much the difference that appears is because of the nature of the medium. So there is something kind of inherently more powerful, more potent about television and the visual, as it were. So I think TV comes across as more strident. It has also kind of played a role in kind of dressing up in funny ways. They dress up like the cops if they are doing a murder story, and they dress up like surgeons if it's a medical story. So they've added to this whole infotainment of becoming less news and more entertainment. And I think in a similar vein, so they're generally exaggerating much more. So there's that level of exaggeration the television does. Otherwise, I find it pretty much at the same thing. If you look at the headlines of Times of India or the Hindustan Times, or very vanilla, broad, centrist kind of newspapers, who are not exactly kind of running red rags of the revolution in the 1990s. They were running things like A Dark Day, the cover of India Today, that has some how it's like a terrible day for India. So they had like page one editorials on the front page. Newspapers had that. I don't see them doing it now. So I find newspapers also running uncritical kind of commentary, full page kind of reportage of what is happening at Ayodhya, not even conveying, for instance, that the temple is half built. Why does it take a Shankaracharya to tell people that the temple is half built and there's a problem with the consecration in a half built temple? This should be something that the media should be asking, that is this the right time for doing this? What's to do with the timing? What's to do with there has to be critical look at who's doing this. Or even, I mean, I'll give you my example. I mean, Mukteshwaranand, the Jyotish Peeth Sai Shankaracharya, did an interview for The Wire, and it is through him that I actually learned, not that I may not have known, but it's kind of buried in this tsunami of information, misinformation, about how this trust came into being, and how it was actually a Ramalaya trust that soon morphed into this new trust that Mr. Champat Rai is the general secretary of. Basic critical questions, simple questions, not even provocative questions, need to be asked by the media, because that's our job on the planet, to give good, clean information, to interrogate a little bit, and make it available to the people to judge, for them to form their minds. So now there's not even that delivery of kind of fact, forget about context or interpretation, that's happening. And I think print has been pretty as bad as it can be without having the kind of visual power of television. And I think even in print, on websites, as you said, a handful of kind of independent websites that have been running the sum total of stories about problems, a critical examination of what's going on, while recording the kind of euphoria and sentiment that it has raised as well. But otherwise, so I see pretty much a uniform trend in what you may call mainstream media or big media, or whatever word you may wish to use, which runs pretty much across media, whether it's news agency, websites, newspapers, and television. But I think the nature of the medium delivers a more exaggerated or a more less hysterical kind of a end plan.
I think Euphoria perfectly sums up the mood on all of these platforms. But I want to go back to 92. You were on the ground when the Babri Masjid structure was brought down. If you could describe to us what you saw that day and what the mood was like.
Oh, okay. So early in the morning, we kind of reached there around 7 o'clock. We've recorded all this. You feel free to see that and use bits from there. So it seemed quite well organized, and we were expecting a symbolic construction ceremony to be held, because that was the Mahut at that time, on the 6th of December, etc. But what we were struck by, my whole team and several journalists with us from Delhi and from Lucknow, etc., who had landed in Faizabad and Ayodhya, was the number of people who had been allowed to gather there, who had been allowed to gather on the site, was quite striking. Tens of thousands of people there. You did have representatives of the state machinery, i.e. officers and mufti, and you had people, the khaki wearing kind of troops, whether it is a policeman or the Central Reserve Police Force, the CRPF, which had responsibility to guard the 2.77 acres, the exact spot where the Babri Masjid was. But seeing how things unfolded exactly at 12 o'clock, it seemed as if all the policemen and all the CRPF troops, particularly in the place where the Babri Masjid was, just disappeared. The public address system suddenly switched from announcements and random stuff to a Ramdhun, started playing there. And there was a systematic attack on all of media that was present there, irrespective of who the media was, in order to divest us of all our tools. So whether it was still cameras, whether it was notepads, whether it was VHS tapes, whether it was beta camera tapes, whether it was all cameras, everything was taken away. And essentially, it was not so much to hurt us. We did get hurt in the process. It was to actually render us inactive and get us out of there. So they clearly did not want any recording of the pulling down of the mosque to happen. And then, given the fact that there was lakhs of people there, the fact that only a few people would get around and execute this operation of pulling down a 16th century reasonably robust, large, solid structure down in 5.5 hours with no intervention, nothing, it went on as per what appeared to be like a plan, seemed to suggest pre-planning and seemed to suggest coordination even between the state government and the central government. Then I think it is about at 5:30 or so p.m. when even the third dome of the Babri Masjid comes down. It had three domes. When it comes down, that is when Kalyan Singh, the then chief minister, submitted his resignation. So it technically goes into the central government, which is led by the Congress party. Mr. Narasimha Rao is the prime minister's jurisdiction, really, that it is his call. But even there, nobody comes in till early morning on the 8th. And that's the time when the makeshift temple is built there. And we believe that the statue of Ram Lala Virajman is taken and placed in that makeshift structure. So this entire time from about, say, 12 noon on the 6th of December till 8th of December morning is left unattended for this entire process of breaking of the Babri Masjid and the setting of the makeshift temple taking place happens. So this clearly could not have happened. It was not anarchy at play, but it was clearly a very organized, methodical uh, planning and execution of a plan that seemed to all of us who were there. A whole lot of us we went and hid in various places. As you know, Ayodhya is a beautiful town and it's full of, I don't know how looks like now, but every little haveli, every little house has a small temple where they invite you to come in and to see that they say this is Ram's, it's birthplace. So this is a very special temple, and beautiful old temples were there in each home. So a lot of people had gone away to either one of those homes, some of us into shops nearby, and were hiding and taking a refuge. And then it was the CRPF vans, if I'm not mistaken, or the PAC vans with the CRPF, where all journalists were taken out around 7 or 8 o'clock at night and taken back to Faizabad, which used to have the hotels, which is where we were staying to, so we could just do our first reports or just tell our head offices in Delhi what was going on. We were taken out from there, and then we weren't allowed back in till the 8th. Because till then, it was almost as if the people who had organized the demolition and who were setting up the makeshift temple were in charge.
So when you faced with such hostility, what was the media's role like? Was there any resistance from within, your fraternity? Did people not want to report things as they witnessed it, or did most of the media manage to remain neutral?
It was very hard to actually remain neutral at that time. So, I'm sure sentiment was exercised on all, whether you were rooting for secular India, or whether you're rooting as a Hindu that day or you're rooting as a Muslim that day. It was a very tough and difficult day, and journalists like others are. So neutrality, no, but an attempt to objectively put down an account, to put down at least log what was happening and to convey what was happening to the rest of the world. I think media exonerated itself fairly honorably, if I may say so. Of course, there are people who would be driven to wild exaggerations on both sides. At that time, it was possible to say both sides because we did have some people who were exaggerating what, a sense of from whatever was happening to even exaggerated by many notches. But I think media did reasonably well to convey, relay, and explain everything. In fact, a lot of the media were witnesses. We were witnesses in several commissions. We were witnesses in the court case that went on, in the Liberhan Commission, in various matters. And media turned up, deposed, it spoke, so some of us on behalf of the CBI, some of us on behalf of the state, where we spoke, we presented our things, and we did for several years. We did it for 28 years or so, that we were bearing witness even as our memories were fading and more news was being foisted on our heads and making it tougher to remember. So we registered FIRs, we did everything. I think media did well. And as I was telling somebody, I was speaking to a colleague and I said, I think the biggest difference, as people say, what is the difference between media then and now, was that then to not have us print the story, you had to beat us up. It took all, you needed to physically put us out of action in order to not get us to print. So I think for me, that's like the biggest certificate we can give ourselves, in a sense. I don't see any need to like compulsorily thrash media now in order to suppress a story. So I think that is like one distinct element. So neutral, no, at no point, and not in 1992. But yes,
Mhm.
whether they were like reasonably objective and in being able to convey honestly what was going on, I think most media kind of did its job.
Do you think this reflected the larger mood of the country? Because even BJP leaders, including Vajpayee, in an interview to Karan Thapar that you guys, The Wire, has put out recently, has said that what happened should not have happened. Not to take away from his stance on the Ram Mandir, but the way in which the structure was brought down was something that he did not agree with. And a lot of political leaders came on record to echo this sentiment. Today, we see a completely different scenario. So, do you think that the media of 92 was also reflecting the mood of the country in that sense?
Yes, I think so. I think we were on the last legs of the Nehruvian kind of framework, if you like, which Atal Bihari Vajpayee exemplifies brilliantly in a way, because also he was so much older and he's like the outer flank of the BJP argument. So for all his kind of, aggression and his being one with the BJP cause, which Abhishek Chowdhury's book also establishes very clearly, but there was this need to kind of hold on to broader values, to talk about tolerance, to talk about India's composite culture. And in fact, even Mr. Advani said that he regretted the demolition. He said it on record. I think it was to the Liberhan Commission that he went on
Mhm.
record to say that he regretted that it had to be done. So the fact that they had to do that, I think hypocrisy is like, as they say, is a big hat tip to principle. It's about to recognize the principle of coexistence and good stuff. So I think you're right, Pooja. The media did reflect that. To some extent, it also helped form that mood to draw those lines from where it was difficult to defy that, or you'd be actually defiling the Indian discourse, or you were less Indian if you were just partisan and for something. So yeah, I mean, in fact, even leading lights of the day who are now top anchors, etc., their old tweets, etc., are doing the rounds where they talk about as recent as 2010, when the Allahabad court gave its first order in the case, in the title suit, where they say that we'd like a mandir and a masjid to exist side by side. But now the fact that you talk about the mosque itself and forget about a mosque side by side, it's blasphemous. And in fact, I was speaking to an old kind of a lawyer who's very familiar with the old Ayodhya cases of the 19th century until then. And they said that even in this conversation about the temple, it is actually and you used to have continuous Ram bhajans happening in what was called the outer courtyard of the masjid complex. The claim about Ramji being born was in the courtyard. It was a courtyard. It was not exactly under the middle of the third dome. So I think a lot of all that ground was shifted because it was such an important political weapon and such an easy kind of a supercharge into people's hearts of a majority community, and to construct for yourself what political scientists call a permanent majority of the kind that Erdogan or others who appeal to religion to justify their political existence can do. So, sort of to define a kind of a Hinduness in opposition to Muslim identity. So I think that whole kind of almost like a bad replay of a 1947 film that happened in 1992, with sort of internal bleeding, the consequences almost as gross as that. So in 1947 you saw it all like split open, though 1947 also did not happen overnight. The build up was clear from the 30s onwards, but I think 1992 that way was also a huge start to the build up of a divide which challenged the whole idea of Indian nationhood. I mean, India in 1950 comprehensively rejects this whole 1930s old-fashioned, boring European idea of, a nation for one language or one religion. But I think this was like a big challenge to the audacity of India in 1950, if you like.
Were reporters on the field stopped from reporting things in 92? Because I hear a lot of young reporters today complaining off the record, of course, saying that their editors want a certain kind of tone in their on-camera PTCs and in their reports. Is that something that anybody saw and witnessed in 92?
No, I don't think so. I think because you do not have the same government at the center and in the state, and I think Indian journalism has always prided itself as having been inoculated against all this after emergency. So there's less of that. There were more market concerns, I think, which were operating if anything, than that. Of course, there were some which you may call partisan, purely partisan ideological channels, some channel names I don't want to take, so you know all of them, which were in existence even then, whose proprietors were clearly on one side of the political argument and very openly so. But I don't think that tradition was there even during, say, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's kind of tenure of 6 years, which is like a significant time in a journalist reporting career, well into the 21st century. I don't think those kind of pressures, this whole hush movement to just shut you down and to just not have, to not brook any argument or to have any voice or conversation. I think this is something that we're kind of seeing for the first time. We've had governments with huge margins. Mrs. Gandhi has twice got more seats than the BJP has managed even now. Nehru had more, but you didn't have this kind of blanket suppression that we now see in the media.
And that brings me to my final question. What do you attribute this kind of, I won't even say subservience, it's almost like the media today is an arm of the government, at least a majority of them. What do you attribute this to?
So, I mean, I may take a little long answering your question. I think there are three things at play here. I think one is that the whole economic model of traditional media has collapsed. So you cannot sell your print newspapers. There is no revenue model they have. So because the collapse of the economic model, because they're facing the technological challenge of digital, and this is a world thing. So the only way they can make money is through government ads. So that dependency on the government has increased. Number two, the general economic decline of India, irrespective of whatever figures the government of India may come up with, is very clear. So that kind of euphoric kind of that little bounce in the media that's visible in the early 20th, 21st century, etc., that's absent. So there are no margins to do your big supplements or to do extra shows or sponsors coming up. Economy, I mean, companies are also squeezed. That further squeezes them, so they become more dependent on the government. There is a sense of thinking that this government is really strong, it's tough, it's going to come after us. And most proprietors have kind of land that they've bought for universities, for a whole lot of other extra reasons. So they feel that they may come after us. And number third, we must not underestimate a genuine chiming with what is being put out, a genuine ideological commitment to what's going on. And if I may add one more thing, which a journalist, and I think a senior journalist wrote about it, that when you sit alone with your pen and paper in a room like you're sitting or I'm sitting in, and you say, there is a certain leader who's getting like 10 million people to his public rally, and I'm sitting here alone with a pen, I can't rally even five. Do I have the authority, or should I even be writing this because he's got people on their side? Which is what explains whether it was in the 30s or now, this big show of big sort of, stadium size crowds, this whole thing, that you generate that feeling that people who are just merely writing, recording, scribes, shall I just turn into a stenographer? Because do I even have the locus to write this? While this man is so popular, or this idea that is really pushing its way, why should I even push? I think a combination of economy, technology, the medium's own economy collapsing, not having a real economic model, and a genuine commitment and terror. All of these have found whatever may be the opposite of a sweet spot, a bitter spot, and has landed us into this absolutely crap media that we see around us now.
Absolutely. And thank God for small mercies. There are still independent news organizations like The Wire, and News Minute has also been putting up.
News Laundry. Yeah.
Of course. And I would urge all our viewers now to also go and check out the work that all these news platforms have been putting out all these days, and also in the run-up to the 22nd. Seema, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to the pieces that you guys will be putting out over the next few days.
Thank you.